But what I have here is a handout. And this handout is going to be covering the next 2 days and the following Monday-ish or Tuesday-ish here. But like I said in that email that I sent out to you all, we're in a little bit of a weird situation not being able to have our schedule in advance, but I guarantee you and I promise you that I will never set you up for disaster or be like, surprise, here's an assignment that's due without emailing you and telling you about it. So let's at least see what's on tap for this week and the assignments that you'll have and make sure that everybody understands what's due. Does that sound good? All right, so today in class, you're going to be turning in this affirmative constructive worksheet. Yes? Okay, let me pull that out. And in class today, we're going to be talking about the first negative constructive lecture. We'll talk about the structure and how to do it and how to put it together. And then for homework tonight, you're going to be doing the first negative constructive worksheet based upon what? The same resolution we're working on. So then in class Thursday, what we'll be doing is that first negative constructive worksheet. And in class, we'll work on the second affirmative constructive lecture. But the homework is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be having you all turn in your team negative and affirmative worksheets. So let's just flip over really quickly. If you'll see here on page 1 and 2, this is the format for the negative constructive speech. Then I have written you out directions for the first negative constructive homework worksheet, and we'll go over that in a little bit. Then you'll see that negative constructive worksheet as well as an evidence sheet to go along, much like you just did with your affirmative. And then we talk about the team negative or affirmative negative. So what I want you to do as a team is you are going to turn in one assignment from your team for this handout. And we'll talk a little bit about this as today goes on. But this handout and assignment for the team affirmative negative is going to be for your topic specifically. So whichever your resolution is, so standardized testing, not the marijuana one. So we're going to be working in tandem, but once we know how to do the first affirmative constructive and the first negative constructive, I want to be able to see that you can transfer that and start to generate some of your own evidence and information for your own debate. So that's what this handout is going to be, and it as well has evidence information. But hopefully this makes clear what we'll be doing in class the next couple days. And after we go over the lecture today, we'll go back through each assignment to make sure that you understand it in full. Sound good? Now, here comes the creme de la creme. I have decided in this class, because of our time, because of how we're going a little bit slower, which I think is fine. Like I said before, my main focus for you as an instructor, as well as our main focus for you all as a department, is that you finish this class knowing how to make an argument. That's what we want to see. How many of us are going on to advanced debate? How many of you are joining the debate team? Oh, okay, if you are, great, fantastic.
Maybe.
Okay, maybe. Great. If you have a great experience with it, you can always continue on. But ideally, remember, this is our base class. We're going to get to know how to make an argument. You'll understand how to go back and forth, how to maybe assert yourself when somebody brings up a claim that you don't agree with, and how to fight that with evidence and logic rather than a screaming match. Ideally, that's what we want from you as a department. So we are going to only do one debate in this class instead of the 3 that we had listed out. I think that's way too advantageous for us to take on, and that pushes us into kind of a scary place. Do we have time to do so? Yes, we do. But alas, after we finish that first debate, I'm going to take some time and think about a fun activity that we can do maybe for our last speech. Maybe it will be a simple platform speech where each of you assert something that you would like to persuade us about, something really easy. Yeah?
You had mentioned at the beginning of the semester that we could have like a trial run
Oh, we will.
Okay, good.
And we're going to be using the marijuana.
Perfect.
And we'll do it as a class, and we have a setup, but I have a date that's scheduled for it.
Okay,
But
sorry.
don't worry. Don't worry. You will get a chance to put this out loud.
Okay.
And I've also decided that in between each round, I'm going to give you a minute to think, rather than having it go back to back to back to back. So in between each round, each of you will have a minute to confer with your teammate, and then you'll begin your next speech. Does that seem good and comfortable and fair and like something that we can all take on for the rest of the semester? Fantastic. Experiential learning is what's most important. The fact that you go home and you can do these homeworks and you can do it in class and we can play in class and we can work it out. That's a learning process in its own, and I feel good and comfortable and confident with all of you in that regard as well. So if you do too, then we're on a good same page. Sound good? All right. Let's talk about the negative constructive. So we've had our affirmative constructive. The affirmative has come out and said, hey, we need to do something, or in whatever case, that in this case, we've said that something needs to be done. We need to create a policy to make this marijuana legal to people 21 and over. And so they came out, or you've come out, with a bunch of different, you started off with listing out your what? Harms, absolutely. The harms with it not being legal, absolutely. So what are the harms? What are the harms to society? What are the harms to the community? What are the harms to individuals? What is the harm with maybe the existing laws or the rules as they exist? Were you able to explore different types of harms? Yes. And of course we supported those with some kind of to show that they are in fact harms. Right, absolutely. And then did eat what?
I think that I did it wrong.
Okay, hon. Because what? Why did you think you did it wrong?
I put benefits
Of what?
of legalizing marijuana.
Okay, yes. So much like, remember, our first speech, you have to lay out the problems first. Remember?
Yeah.
The first main point is always your
I
problems.
think
This
I
is
got
the
confused.
harm.
It's affirmative, so I thought we were
Meaning you are for legalizing it. But in order for me to ever take action on
that
something,
makes sense.
I have to first know that there's a problem with it. Otherwise, why should I take action on it? Okay. So it's like in order, because right now, though, like just saying that it would be a great thing is fantastic. That could be maybe a philosophy or perchance something that you bring up in your rebuttal or even in your plan, right? To talk about those benefits.
Okay.
Don't worry. We're going to get on the right track, okay? But for now, we want to list out the harms that are going on. So we've listed out our harms, and then we've suggested that something needs to be done, like we need to make it legal, right? So did each of us go to the internet or go to the research, and did we find some kind of plan in general that we can place into action? Yes? Okay, great. Ideally, that's what each of us are going to want to do with our own resolutions, right? All of you have been provided with resolutions. And one of the main things that you should always do when starting out any debate is to think about what types of plans are going to come out of this, whether on the affirmative or the negative. It's like, what are they going to potentially be saying? Or what are they going to potentially be suggesting as the harm? What would the plan potentially be? What is logical and going on in the world? So each of you were able to lay out a plan in general? Kind of? Yes? Somewhat? Sort of? Okay, fantastic. That being said, let's take a look then at the negative. And let's start to look how this will happen. So once the affirmative has laid out their first speech, the negative is now going to get up and give their speech. And obviously their speech is going to be against the resolution. All right, so once you get up, the same thing happens. We'll lay it out. Here comes a nice introduction. My name is so-and-so, my partner, blah, blah, and we are here to speak for the negative. And who are you thanking? We'd like to thank our opponents for this wonderful opportunity to debate this amazing topic, to our judges for sitting and listening and watching us, for our timers, and for this amazing audience for being a part of today. Something to the extent, right? And you express the pleasure like it says, and then we go into laying it out. So for this case, you are going to restate the resolution. Today, we were presented with the resolution that this House believes recreational marijuana should be legal for those 21 and over in California. And your job is to say, no, that this legality is going to propose maybe more problems than it being illegal in the first place. So the idea here is that we want to either accept or reject the resolution, and then we also have the opportunity to correct definitions. Now let me tell you this, that is an advanced strategy that you are not, for the purpose of this class, going to go into. What happens when you decide that you want to change definitions, which you can very easily do? So you have laid out that, let's say, this House believes that recreational marijuana should be legal for those 21 and over in California. You could say something on the negative, we agree, but we believe that it should be 18 and over in California. Now what does this make this debate? Or is it a clashing of two arguments? Or is it essentially now two different what? It's two different affirmatives, it's two different arguments. And so we oftentimes will not get the clash of ideas that we could from a traditional debate. It is a very advanced strategy that individuals will use, but for the purpose of our one big debate, your job will be to accept the definitions that are laid out. So you can say the affirmative has suggested that that recreational marijuana should be legal to those 21 or over in California, and we will accept the definitions today. However, so although you accept their claim and you accept their definitions, you don't have to accept what? That this is an actual what? Problem. That this is actually something that needs to be changed, that this is something that needs to be done. So like it says in here under B, we accept the definitions provided by the affirmative, but we cannot accept the contentions laid out by them. So if the harms, aka those problems, don't seem to be very valid, that's what you can make a big claim about here as well. But you can also suggest that the plan, although you don't know it in full yet, is also going to be something that you don't agree with. But it's not necessary to do so until you hear that plan. So let's go ahead and see, once you say just a simple statement like, thank you, we're so happy to be here, the affirmative has laid out this resolution, we're going to accept those definitions. However, the contentions that they have brought up give us no reason to see a need to make marijuana legal, and in fact, we believe that the plan they're proposing is going to lead to even more harms than it is, or by changing how the status quo is going to lead to many problems, as the status quo is working just fine. So our job as a negative is to really get an idea as to what their plan is initially, and think, do we want to kind of maintain the status quo by just keeping it illegal? We can do something like that. Keeping it illegal, we'll do A, B, and C, and D. And even though keeping it illegal is causing a lot of problems, maybe causing these problems by doing an opposition, it's going to create more. We can make that cost-benefit analysis if we we want to. But just start to think, how do you want to argue that idea about their plan? So then all you'll have to do after, so we lay that out, is you'll describe the issue in general from the negative point of view. Something like, much like that of the affirmative, we don't want these statements to become a debate of their own. This is your idea of a philosophy. So remember, if at the beginning the affirmative lays out their philosophy, like they want to legalize marijuana for 21 and over because it's going to provide more opportunity for California to get out of debt and less problems in regards to people being imprisoned unnecessarily. Your general philosophy on the negative could suggest that there is no way that California will be able to get out of just by legalizing marijuana. And in fact, incarceration will not be changed at all. So you can make some kind of philosophy, but again, you do not want to leave yourself open to any contradicting statement. So it's not like you want to lay out a policy of your own or suggest any problems or suggest that, oh, well, we know that these problems do exist, but don't back yourself into a corner with that. A general philosophy. And then the last thing that you do is introduce your case using something like a thesis. So remember, just like the other team did, when you lay out your thesis for the affirmative, today we were provided with this resolution, and our plan will fix it. You can say something like, we are going to suggest that the resolution not be upheld or taken in, as there is either one, no need for the plan, or there is a need, just not their need. But again, we don't want to come up with an alternative, i.e. the 18. So again, that there will be no need for this plan, or remaining the status quo will be ideal. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So everybody gets the introduction of the negative. Let's go through it one more time. You say, hey, hello, how are ya? Thanks for having us. Here's the resolution, but we don't agree with the harms, and we don't think that their plan is going to help it. Ideally, when we talk about legalizing marijuana, keeping it illegal is going to be much more beneficial to the state of California as well as the individuals, and that's why today we are here to suggest that this plan, that the resolution has laid out for us, as well as their harms, are not valid, and thus you would not need to take on their resolution. Does that make sense to them? And that's as easy as that introduction is. Are we 1,000% sure you get it? Promise? Okay, good. Let's look to the second half. You'll literally so now we'll get into the body. So you lay out the thesis for the affirmative. The affirmative today has laid out that there are reasons for change. They laid out problems like, what was your first problem on your affirmative?
The impacted prisons.
They laid out impacted prisons. They also laid out, what was another problem? Want to give me one? U.S. money going to cartels and gangs. And they also laid out, anyone will do.
Missing out on opportunities for taxation.
Ooh, that we will be missing out on opportunities for taxation. However, what? These needs, these problems are not as problematic. These needs or these problems or these harms are not actually an issue. Their plan of legalization will take care of none of this. And so then we go into each of their points. This is the exact same thing you did in your first speech, in the causes portion. Does everybody remember your second main point of your first speech? You laid out the reasons of the opposition, the reasons why people disagreed with your claim. This is essentially the exact same structure. you will take their claim of, so if we said the first one was impacted prisons, your job is going to be to show that legalizing marijuana will not change the problems of impacted prisons. Because what is the problem with impacted prisons? Have any of you laid out some of those ideas?
There's like more funding that has to go into the prisons.
Okay, so we have a lot of money that's going into these prisons to support and to feed and to house individuals who are in there because of using marijuana. Absolutely. So, in that case, your job, again, is to really look that when we legalize this, is it going to change that issue of the money that we put into the prison system? How much money is going to be saved? Can we guarantee that? Can we see or find a place where they have, in fact, decided to unlegalize it? And what has happened to their jail systems in that area? Does that make sense? Have they gone down? Are they still putting more and more money into the prison systems? Are those individuals who are, so if we're talking about impacted prisons in regards to money, fantastic, but I think that another idea on money and impacted prisons, anything else? That these people are committing what kind of crimes?
Petty.
Okay, are they petty crimes? So would there be anything, I mean, I would talk about petty crimes if I was on the affirmative. Did any of you do that? Okay. Your job here then, in the negative, would also be to address petty crimes. So finding evidence that would suggest that these individuals, if not placed in prison or in jail for marijuana, have they also been convicted of anything else? Does that make sense to you? That just because we don't take them here or put them in jail, they've already also committed something over here. So having them in prison is definitely going to help. That it's a gateway rule breaker. I don't know. Like once I sell that weed, I'm going to start selling everything else, and I'm going to kill somebody. I don't know. Slippery slope.
If you're arguing for the negative,
Mm-hmm.
are you going to be able to see the harms listed beforehand?
No. So you will hear the harm. So that's why I have you working on a worksheet right now already, or that worksheet for the pros and cons, that you start working on both sides.
I see.
So that you can start to assume what arguments they're going to make.
Okay.
And you can already automatically assume, like, okay, well, did any of you by chance go to that website of ProCons that I laid out for you? ProCon? Okay, ProCon has a lot of information on there, as well as opposing viewpoints. So you can start to see some of the arguments that are made. And once you get fully researched on those and have them, you'll have a lot of those in your back pocket. So we talked before about how lawyers, will oftentimes argue, and they have to know, like, all these millions of cases that have been argued before them. The good news is that you will have only one topic that you can become fully vested and researched in, so you won't have to know, like, the 4,000 cases of what's happened before. But becoming very well read on your topic is going to be incredibly helpful. The other thing is that if they bring up a harm that you haven't necessarily planned for, but you do have a gamut of evidence there, what do you think that you can start to maybe do on the spot? going to bet that you can come up with a reason as to why that isn't a harm. And you don't necessarily need to provide evidence to us, but instead you can walk us through what? Like you've done in your other speech. I requested that with each refutation, you gave us some kind of evidence, but maybe evidence wasn't always necessary. And logically, we could see how that wouldn't make sense without providing any evidence altogether.
Could you use like fallacies?
Absolutely. That could also be a fallacy. You know, we could draw that out if we wanted to, that there was an error in some type of their reasoning. Remember that their evidence maybe isn't fully what? Representative of the case that we're presenting. Be like, well, that happened in Colorado, but like, can we be assured that all Coloradians are just like those of Californians, you know? Or that all Maines, I mean, in a very Republican state, are going to be the same as those of California? I would suggest that this demographic is incredibly different, and thus this comparison is by far 2 light years away. Something of the such. So you can start making these comparisons of areas where you can fault them. Now, of course, in the affirmative, it's going to go back to them, and they're going to have to pick that up. And, like, if their evidence wasn't strong enough to begin with, then they need to give maybe another example of how that information or how that statistic was valid or how it is representative or how there is enough. But we can start pinpointing elements that or picking apart their argument in ways without having to provide evidence in full. But essentially, your job, like it says here, is to clash the arguments. So let's look at B, clash the arguments. So you're going to lay out the thesis of the affirmative and then start to develop your case. So the affirmative laid out 3 needs for change in their first speech. They said that there were impacted prisons. They said that there was an opportunity that we were losing out on for taxes. And finally, that... Money is going to cartels. So as the negative, I'm going to address each of these and show how they are not valid claims, thus making no reason for you to accept the resolution presented today. So you would lay out each one, and you would provide evidence, if possible, to suggest how that isn't true, and then give us some kind of reasoning statement, drawing back to why that makes no sense and we do not need to adopt their particular policy. Does that make sense to you all? Much like we did in that first speech. So here are some areas, as it says here on 2, that you will want to make for your clash. And what we call a clash is essentially they have brought up an idea, and now you're going to bring up the counter to that. And when we bring up 2 differing ideas, there is a clashing of an argument. This is essentially a concept or a term from Greek rhetoric, this idea that the clashing of arguments exists in any situation for us to establish the truth. It's what the purpose of our justice system is. It's why we always have a defense and a offense, or a defense and a prosecution, or a pro and a con. Because when we get these clashing of arguments, it allows for the audience, or the judge, or the jury to come to their conclusion as to which they believe to be true. Does that make sense? That's why we have 2 presidential debates, so that we can listen to the Republican side and the Democratic side. And when they both lay out their arguments, we hope that they clash together and expose what the truth in fact is. So that's why we call it the clash. And the clash will happen on both the affirmative and the negative sides. So here's some things I want you to consider for this clash. So when you are writing your refutation and your evidence that's going to show how this is true, and then a little bit of a reasoning statement, going back to, if this isn't true, then there is no need to be illegal, right? Or there's no need to change the system that is currently there. Or that's why we need to maintain and uphold the illegality of marijuana. So the three-step process that you did in your first speech, you're going to essentially do again. But there's a couple different strategies that you can use, and you can think this through when you're writing your reasoning statements. So the first thing that you can do is you can refute the need for change, explaining why the status quo is preferable. So here we would think that maybe whatever we bring up in there, or whatever they brought up and whatever you're arguing, that the present system is a good system. This one is preferable. This one is a good way to stay. Also, if your affirmative has suggested that the present system, it being illegal, is what's making the problems worse, then you can go ahead and suggest that the problem isn't necessarily the legality, but instead that issue that you're talking about regarding prison systems has to do instead with systemic racism. And regardless of what happens with marijuana, people of color are going to be imprisoned regardless of what substance or abuse they are using. Does that make sense? So that the issue is, it's not necessarily the legality that's going to solve it. There's something else underneath or systemically wrong that's going to be this issue. You could also go and feel free to do this. Suggest that there is no need for change by diminishing the significance of the harm, right? So if they say that the prison system right now is, so what were we saying? Drug cartels. That we're getting this stuff from drug cartels, right? So if we're talking about drug cartels and that, like, we have an estimate of $1 million that we are providing to drug cartels by having marijuana illegal in California, you, on the negative, could come in and say what? If we wanted to say that that's not really a harm, or we want to diminish that $1 million. Because suggest that $1 million, I know that sounds like a lot to all of us as college students, but in the grand scheme of governments and funding, etc., $1 million towards cartels is not that much. And what we could do is we could provide, like, oh, maybe how much is a lot. And goodness gracious, we donated, $7 billion last year to ISIS. So really, we're fighting over this $1 million to drug cartels. I say we put that money elsewhere and we stop worrying about this legality of marijuana. Does that make sense to y'all? Okay, good. So you can use that quantitatively. You can use that qualitatively. Again, suggesting that the harm isn't that bad to begin with. That these numbers that you're showing me, when we break them down in the grand scheme of things, don't make a lot. Or, for example, like that was just representative of that one story or that one situation. This has no bearing on the entire society of a whole. Or was that evidence that you gave us of a bunch of 16-year-olds? Interesting, because that harm has no bearing on this particular resolution, and again, not proving anything about legalizing for 21 and older. Or another strategy that you could use to reason with the evidence that they provide is maybe why the change would be worse. So a lot of times we look to situations, so I think I brought this up last time, whereby Donald Trump had suggested to go back to this idea of waterboarding, that he really believes in waterboarding and that we need to waterboard individuals to defeat ISIS. So, like, let's just put waterboarding to defeat ISIS back in there, thinking that it's going to be a contained situation. It's really like his resolution. But if we were thinking about that, if we bring back in waterboarding for ISIS, what does that do? How is that going to be worse than what's happening right now? All right, right now there's allegedly no waterboarding, so we're not doing that, but we're not winning. ISIS thing, right? So let's bring back in waterboarding in order to beat ISIS. And you may not know a lot about this topic, and that's okay. Waterboarding isn't necessarily an idea of just the United States. It's something of the United Nations. And the second that we say let's waterboard for ISIS, it makes it a very easy slippery slope to do what? Well, we did it for ISIS, so we should very well do it for anything else that's going on. This change is going to be worse for the system, as it will allow for those in authority to put forth more forms of torture, thus encouraging more forms of torture towards those in the United States rather than, right? So it's like if the U.S. is doing it, then, I mean, we usually don't do these kinds of torture in warfare, because it's that idea that if we treat your war criminals decently, you will then in turn treat our war criminals what? Decently. And it's kind of this whole like underground negotiation that they go on to. But you could present why that's going to be worse. You know, this is a lot what they're doing right now. Like Bernie Sanders, if you try to make a system of where we are going to like have this health care, that's going to cause more problems than what we have now. So Obamacare, they would be like, stick with the status quo, or repeal it altogether, or absolutely not, don't do anything, leave Obamacare as is, because if everybody has an opportunity for a pay-in system, then it's going to increase taxes and increase whatever. So you would suggest that whatever they are bringing up is going to be worse than. This last one is a suggestion if you've already gotten into a plan, if that makes sense. If they've laid out a plan, you can suggest, ooh, we know why that plan is not going to work, and you can bring it up if you want it. Like it says here, at this point, the affirmative will not have laid out the plan of action, literally a step A, step B, step C, step D, but they will have referred to the plan in general, which many of you hopefully did in your first one. So make sure that you are in your clash addressing that plan at least a bit. That shows that you didn't drop the argument. The most important thing for you as a negative is to make sure that you are addressing each of their arguments. In this case, if you do not address an argument in the first negative constructive that the first affirmative constructive brought up, that argument goes through and it's considered a win, no matter how hard you work to backtrack. And this is how it will continue to go. So the same thing, they're going to bring up the negative, and then guess what the affirmative is going to need to do? Talk about each of their contentions and prove how each of those was wrong. And then you go back to the negative, and they're going to go in one more time, right? So what I would encourage us to do is really, as a team, be sure that we're hitting out. And when we go through how to flow an argument, this will help make sure that you're hitting and not dropping any arguments as well. But if they bring up the plan, at least assert in some way using one of these favors of, or one of these resources of reasoning as to why that's not going to work, or how it's more problematic, or how it's going to be worse than. So then all you need to do is summarize the negative case so far and suggest that now we see there is no need for plan or change of policy. So what I would do is something simple as I've gone back and I showed you how so the affirmative laid out that impacted prisons are an incredible problem, but we have shown you that prisons, maybe in one case, that their plan will not help these impacted prisons, and in fact it is a completely different issue altogether. They talked about how it will relieve some debt. This debt will not be enough of a debt to get California out of debt, and the repercussions that would come will be much worse than just relieving debt, because we will have more prisoners on the streets. Does this make sense to you? So it's something simple as recapping what we did and then saying thank you and then sitting down. So, does this layout make sense to all of us and what you would need to address? Anybody like, oh, Amanda, wow.
plan this well without getting an affirmative said to us? Or are we just doing it on our own affirmative?
What do you mean?
Like, 'cause a lot of this is acknowledging the arguments of the affirmative. So if we're supposed to do this for homework, right?
Yes, but I haven't set you up with your buddy that you're going to be working off of yet. So, everybody, right now, find somebody who isn't your partner. Make eye contact. Did you make eye contact? Does everybody have a buddy? Do you have a buddy? Who doesn't have a... Okay, you two buddies. Good. So, now, why don't you go over with that person and move your desk to face them. And we're going to flip over this paper that talks about your homework.
Oh my god, I didn't use it.
Yeah, okay, yes, because yours isn't, you don't have yours, right?
No, I have mine.
You have yours, but okay, no worries. So this is what we're going to do for the purpose of your worksheet. Take a picture of Erica's. Okay. Did anybody else?
And Sonia's did hers wrong because we talked about it.
Okay. You all laid out benefits?
I think it's just how we worded it. Because I can just change all of mine.
To what?
It's easy to change. Like, I'm saying legalizing marijuana will benefit the economy. I can say, like,
And it will.
like, if we don't legalize marijuana, we'll be missing out. And she said we'll be missing out on benefits to the economy.
Fantastic. Okay. So do you want to go ahead and rework that real quick? Well, the only thing is that we're going to need to, how about,
I can't do it now.
okay, so
I thought we were doing
is yours correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Is yours correct? Okay, let me see. Yeah, no, that's okay. We could too. Yours is correct. Because you're listing out problems, if you will. Now, I see that you're saying that it's not a harmful substance, per se, but again, you can easily essentially switch it, that it should be legal because it's not harmful. As not harmful. That's what we would need. That's where it would become something. Marijuana, so the problem is that marijuana is treated as a harmful substance. You can totally reason with information in that way. Absolutely. Again, it's going to depend upon the problem. So, remember when I always say start off your first sentence with the first problem with marijuana not being legal is? That will help guide you. Does that make sense? So the first problem, this would maybe be a plan. I don't think so. No. okay, the reason why it needs to be legal is because too much money is being put into the black market. The last problem with marijuana not being legal is that cigarettes are illegal. No, so it doesn't make sense anything that first sentence there. I always tell you that. So erase this one, change this one to be right. Okay, this is going to be a plan. Remember, okay, so we're saying the fine. Remember, we have one specific plan. And you're going to, again, it's not about our last speech. So last time, everybody really quick with your plan. Let's come back together and talk about this quickly. With your plan, we talked last time that you need one plan. Meaning, I want to instate a law that's been done already. I'm going to come up with a law altogether. I'm going to write a new policy. I am going to write a policy to remove this existing law. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So for example, did anybody put one plan? Yes.
It was to replace criminal law with home health studies. So like taking away the crime part of it and then putting in like how they do like the tobacco ads and stuff like that.
Okay. Yes.
We did adding a 15% tax on marijuana, and that it would have to be smoked privately and not in public areas.
Okay. Is there a law that like exists that will encompass all those things already?
Like the alcohol law.
Yeah, and this is maybe it. And you can call it, if you're coming up with a law that you've pieced together, you saw something worked in Colorado, you saw something worked in Washington, you saw something worked in Oregon, right? Then you could call it the new Marijuana California Act. And it's going to do blank, blank, and blank. Sure, you can lay that out in the future. Or, like I wrote you out in that first sample, we're going to adopt the Iowa State Funding Education Program here in California. You can take Washington's full law and use it all together. We are going to suggest a modified version of Washington's marijuana law. Does that make sense? So it's one thing. Again, we're not encouraging each person in our audience, the platform, to go out and take multiple steps to make things happen. We want to come up with one plan that's going to solve all of these problems. And that's typically what a policy does. You're not allowed to drink here on campus in your rooms because they think it's going to help you not do what? Yeah, so what are the things that people were maybe getting in trouble with? People were like destroying rooms, and there was too many sexual assault cases, and people were throwing up, and there was so many issues of assault, and there was all this stuff that was going on, and they figured out that all the reasons that this was happening was because people were drinking in their rooms. So they said, F that, nobody can drink ever again in their rooms. And that's the law that they wrote. But I'm quite sure that's why they don't let you drink or in your room. Right? And because you're not 21. So it just is encouraging all these things. Right? So like all those problems were solved by that one law that went in and said, hey, no more.
So we're not supposed to write for?
No, you're writing harms and I. So this is the deal. You're going to come and you need to meet with me. Do you think so? I can meet with you after class today, or I can meet with you literally before class for an hour, or I can meet with you on the phone every other day that I'm not here on campus. I will make any time that you want for me, like I said at the beginning of the semester. There is no reason at this point that any of you should say, I'm confused. Guess who's here for you? Me. And we'll work on it 17 times until I can come up with a new way to make it make sense to you. Sound good? Since you two are in the same boat, is it making a little more sense to you? Okay, good. Always. Remember, write that first sentence. the first problem, the first harm, the second harm of it not being legal is too many people are getting in accidents, too many people are getting UIs, too many people are dying. Right? Those were your harms in your first one. Same thing. So problems. Think about the bad stuff. Think about bad stuff to individuals, bad things to the country, bad things to whatever. And if you want to bring up in this case, you can talk about a issue, but remember the plan was down here. When I said fours, when I wrote that email, I said, don't worry about writing down like the ones, the twos, the threes, and the fours. That's what I wanted you to write down, like inherency and wrong with them. No, we're just going to write down one plan and call it a day. That's all I want to do. One plan. Here. Okay. What's up, hon?
Will you make sure that we
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. So I'm going to come around, but what I want you to do, at least so that you understand for the purpose of this assignment that you're working on next, is to one. So if you look at this handout that I've given you, right, the negative constructive worksheet, you're going to go ahead and write out the resolution of your opponent on the top of your paper. So whoever you're next to, whatever the resolution was that they wrote. I'm going to guess that the resolution's the same because we're all working on the same resolution. Then you're going to write out their harms in the clash area. So remember, this A, this B, this C, that this D is simply there to guide you. You can use bullet points if it makes you feel better. But you're going to want to address each of the harms that they brought up. So you could say something like, the affirmative's first harm the affirmative brings up is the issue of impacted prisons. Then, remember when we refuted in our last one? This sounds like a great idea on the surface. However, do you remember that worksheet that I gave you all last time when you discussed your causes? And I gave you like that wording, like, this seems like an interesting problem. This seems like it's a harm. I see what they're going with this harm, but it's really not that much. And let me tell you why. Right? So we will lay out each of those. And then, like it says, refute or concede using the correct terminology per the refutation handout, so you can say any of those things. And then give evidence and reasoning to show the harm is not a harm or will not be helped by the suggested plan if that was offered. So your job is to literally lay out their assertion. Let me write this out just really quick. Is everybody listening, or are you each? Okay, really quick. So remember, you want to lay out their harm. Then you want to say, that's not right. Or, not even close. Whatever your refutation statement may be. And then what will you provide?
evidence?
Some evidence. Some evidence that shows that it's not, in fact, a harm. And then you will reason with that evidence to show how that evidence is either not supportive or it's not going to go back to one of those four ideas, that it's not going to help out more, and that's why you need to reject this policy. That it's not going to do blanks, you need to reject this policy. Yeah.
Oh, so for A, we're going to say the harm that they laid out?
Right, so you'll say the first harm the affirmative suggested is that there are impacted prisons.
And then
Yes, there are impacted prisons, but this law will not help those. And let me tell you why. Evidence shows.
And then 1 and 2 are evidence.
Yeah, and again, much like I said for those last ones, those 1s and 2s are simply there for you to know that you support. But like if you want to give evidence and then write a reasoning statement and give another evidence, fantastic.
Thank you.
But however you do, as long as all of you know that in your causes, much like in your first speech, you lay out the assertion for that issue, you refute it, you give the evidence, and you show why that evidence is actually proving that that isn't an issue altogether. Does that, everybody is reminded of how that works and it makes sense to you? Kind of, sort of? If, maybe. Maybe a yes or no. Okay, good. So, okay, good. So then, You're going to use your evidence cards again, and what I want you to do is, for your homework assignment, at least provide me with 2 pieces of evidence to combat their harm in whatever way you choose to take that combating on, right? Like the status quo maybe is preferable, that's not even contributing to the problem, like that's not even going to be the issue. Again, that isn't even a harm to begin with. One person, come on, out of the whole country, that's not going to work. Let me give you some evidence to show that. And then, so I just need 2 pieces of evidence for the harm. And then again, like I said, all you need to do is say like, oh, in my argument, if you want to write like argument A, argument B, argument C, like the first one, second one, if you want to, then just give that evidence and give the source. And then look at their proposed plan. And all I want you to do is suggest a clash for that plan. Yeah.
So for that, would it be like proof that the plan isn't like working, isn't being enforced?
Yes. So you don't know if they're going to come up with their own plan.
So like if they had like, if their plan was like something that the state of Colorado is using or whatever,
Sure.
then would a good appropriate clash be like, this is it, but like it's not actually being enforced or no one's actually listening to it?
Yeah. Or like what is it, right? So again, it's like, or California is so much different than in Colorado. How can we assume that just because A works, B is going to work as well? So you can start reasoning with it on a general scale there. But at least address that plan is not going to help, that it's not going to hinder, that it maybe is going to be worse than. Maybe a time when you've seen it be worse than. And then find one reason, at least find one piece of evidence that could suggest why that plan isn't going to work. And then so in your third box, you'll just write plan, and then you'll give some kind of source or evidence that's going to suggest, or some place that you've looked. Yeah, hon?
So what exactly is due next class?
Oh, good. Let's look back to that front page, huh? Front page. Keep it on.
But that's not this one, right?
No, it is that one. Yes. This is the clash plan. This is the negative constructive worksheet. So all you're going to do is write down so like the affirmative state that, the affirmative stated, and then whatever whatever she said her plan was, be like the affirmative plan is the blank, and this isn't going to work. And maybe find a piece of evidence that lets you We're welcome so much. So, yeah.
When you say the negative constructive worksheet is doing